During tonight's lecture, we ask that you please type any of your questions in the Zoom's Q&A feature, which you can open by clicking on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. At the end of the lecture, I will ask the questions aloud to Cara, and we'll answer as many as possible. I'd now like to take a second to share with you all the mission of NYC Bird Alliance. For those of you who don't know, we're a conservation nonprofit that works to protect wild birds and their habitats in New York City. Through conservation science, advocacy, and engagement, we aim to make the city a more bird-friendly place. A key part of our organization's work involves scientific research, including bird and biodiversity monitoring across the city, as well as the community science projects where everyday New Yorkers help us collect data on bird populations and conservation threats. The data we collect then informs our advocacy efforts, through which we aim to make New York City more sustainable for wildlife and for people. We're currently focused on making the city's buildings safer for birds by pushing forward laws that would require buildings to turn off unnecessary lights at night and to use bird-safe glass in their windows. You can get involved by writing to your elected officials, talking to your neighbors and building managers, and subscribing to our email list to learn more. But this all starts with our engagement efforts, which connect birds with people. Every year, we host hundreds of bird outings, classes, workshops, and festivals, engaging New Yorkers from all 5 boroughs to foster an appreciation for birds and for nature. You can learn more about our volunteer opportunities, advocacy efforts, and our full program calendar through the links in the chat. Tonight, you join us for one of our longtime programs, our winter lecture series, this year called Spread Your Wings. From November through March, we'll be joined by birders, authors, and conservation scientists who will discuss the wonder of birds, both around the world and throughout time. I want to thank Claude and Lucienne Bloch for their ongoing support for this amazing program. I'm now pleased to welcome our speaker tonight, Cara Giaimo. Cara lives in Somerville, Massachusetts with her wife Lilia, 2 cats, many plants, and uncountable neighborhood rats. A former staff writer at Atlas Obscura, Cara now covers our fellow species for the New York Times, The Plant, The Drift, and elsewhere. Her first book, Detector Dogs with Christina Couch, was published by MIT Kids Press in 2022. She plays guitar in Sidebody. And tonight, Cara joins us to share a few of the birdiest stories in the newest edition of Atlas Obscura, Wildlife, an explorer's guide to the world's living wonders. Written by Cara and Atlas Obscura co-founder Joshua Foer, the book is composed of 500 stories of the world's most fascinating, most unusual, and least understood flora and fauna, from the Antarctic deserts to lush jungles, to the deepest fathoms of the ocean, and into the heart of our densest cities. I highly recommend anything that Atlas Obscura publishes, and these books hold a very special place in my heart, so it's my absolute honor to welcome Cara. Take it away.
And today, we're going to be focusing on the stars that are birds, because this is New York City Bird Alliance, and you guys have already given me some really, truly great examples of birds in the comments here. So what do stars do during the season? You want to switch the slide, go a couple forward. Maybe one more. They get awards. And so for tonight, I've put together something that I call the Atlas Obscura Wildlife Cool Bird Awards. And if you want to go one slide forward, I will explain our first award. Our first award tonight is for the loudest bird. This award is special because most of the award categories I kind of made up and assigned on my own. But the loudest bird is actually an official title that this bird has. It is, at least as far as science has been able to determine, officially the loudest bird is, if you want to go to the next slide, the white bellbird. So if people aren't familiar with the white bellbird, it looks kind of like this. This is a beautiful illustration by Iris Gottlieb, who did the illustrations within the book. The white bellbird lives in the mountain forests of northeastern South America. It doesn't really sound like your typical bird. It sounds kind of like this. I'm going to see if I can play this clip over Zoom here. Could people hear that? No, sort of.
Unfortunately.
Okay. Well, it kind of sounds like, all right, let me try to describe it. It's like if you were, it's kind of like the screech that a playground swing makes when you like swing really high and the chain kind of rubs at the top and it's just kind of like that. But imagine that sound at 125 decibels, which is somewhere between like a chainsaw at very close range and a military jet takeoff. And so, what does the white bellbird do with this special noise? It is actually a mating call. And in order to maximize the loudness and impressiveness of the mating call, what the white bellbird does is kind of swings his head this way and then whips over, faces the female directly, and sings the note like straight into her face as loud as he possibly can. And this must actually be an effective strategy because sexual selection has made over time this note shorter in duration and more intense until it has gotten to the very loudest in the world, as we can see today. To produce this sound, the white bellbird males also have what one researcher described to me as washboard abs that you can see through his belly feathers. So a very impressive bird and our first awardee tonight. Do you want to move to the next slide? Um, sorry, yeah, the fonts got kind of messed up, but you can see that this says, this is the award for Best Interior Decorator. If you want to continue on. We're going to give this award to bowerbirds. These birds live in Australia. There are a number of different species of bowerbirds. They have a very different pickup strategy than the white bellbird. The white bellbird screams in your face. The bowerbird will build you a fancy and beautiful house. So the first thing that the bowerbird does to construct this house is make sort of a stick structure. You can see this, I think this is a satin bowerbird, or maybe not. I'm sorry. I don't know exactly what species of bowerbird this is, but he makes a structure that kind of looks like an upside down arch. Other bowerbirds might make like a stick tent that can be up to 9 feet tall. Other species have different shapes. Once they've constructed what is called a bower, obviously just building it is not enough. You also have to decorate it. You have to curate it. And so the bowerbirds will explore their environments and they'll bring home, gifts that everybody loves to see in their home, such as feathers, flowers, snakeskin bits, snail shells, dead bugs. Sometimes if they live near people, they'll bring trash. So they really like toothbrushes. They like bullet shells, like spent bullets, and they like condoms. So they'll bring all these things from the surrounding area and carefully arrange them in the home. And this bower is used 100% for just like wooing and then what comes after wooing. They don't live there. It's just their little love nest. If a female likes the bower, she will stay and mate with the male, and if not, she'll leave. But all the effort can really be worth it because male bowerbirds can mate with up to 30 females in one season if they like their beautifully decorated and festooned bower. So bowerbird is our best interior decorator. I would love to see what one would do with my apartment. If you want to move on, we're going to get to the award for the most unexpectedly bloodthirsty bird. Sorry, it fell off the screen here. But this award is a total no-brainer. It goes to the vampire finch. This is one of the, I think, coolest birds on earth. I love learning and talking about the vampire finch. So the vampire finch lives in the Galapagos Islands. People are probably pretty familiar with Galapagos finches. They're really famous because they helped Darwin conceptualize his theory of evolution through natural selection, and they've helped a lot of scientists since then kind of tease out the scientific underpinnings of that theory and exactly how it works. But the vampire finch is kind of underrated. It's not clear that Darwin ever saw one because they live on these really far out islands where people don't usually visit, even back then. All Galapagos finches are famous specifically for their bills, which evolution has helped push to be very different sizes and used for very different things. So you have finches that have big beaks that can crack seeds, and you have woodpecker finches with very skinny beaks that can be used like other woodpeckers use their beaks. But the vampire finch beak has evolved to help them drink blood, specifically from boobies like the one pictured here. So in this picture, you can see a vampire finch with a bloody beak, and you can see how he has pecked this booby under the wing. So the vampire finches often will kind of gang up on the boobies. They'll peck at their skin and then literally drink the blood that comes out. And they actually have developed the same kind of gut bacteria as vampire bats have to help them digest the iron. So this is, yeah, one of the world's most metal birds. Next, we're going to move on to, what's the next award? The most accessibly wondrous award. Okay, this one is pretty fun. We're going to give this one to starlings. Starlings individually are not always considered impressive, although I think they are. They're kind of iridescent. They're very beautiful. But often starlings are sort of places they're not supposed to be. They're introduced birds in much of their range, and people can kind of consider them pesky or annoying or just like too multitudinous. They also sometimes can cause trouble, like Kias. They'll mess with human stuff. There's like this fun story from 1949 where a bunch of starlings landed on the minute hand of Big Ben and stopped it from moving, therefore like changing the time for all of London for a little while. But starlings can do something really cool, which is they can create these incredible murmurations. So they'll take off in flocks of up to 1 million, and they'll do this flocking behavior. They'll create these incredible shapes. If you've ever seen them, they're sort of like difficult to comprehend. They kind of look unearthly, like a lava lamp or like the aurora borealis. Like it's hard for the eye to track this kind of motion over time. But they actually make these shapes similarly to how fish are able to school. Each individual bird is just following its like 6 or 7 nearest birds. And with all of them doing that, it makes these cool patterns. Scientists aren't completely sure why starlings create murmurations. They're pretty unique in doing so. Some theories include maybe they're trying to stay warm. They often will do this in the winter at dusk, sort of before settling in for the night. Another theory is that it's confusing to predators to have them all, flying in these crazy shapes. But either way, if you're in a city, and you're leaving work around dusk and it's wintertime, especially over bodies of water, you can often see this happening. So it's a very accessible form of wonder offered even to us who do not live in the middle of nature. Next, we're going to talk about a slightly less accessible wonder. We're giving the Best Rave Companion Award to the fluorescent budgie. There aren't a lot of non-wild animals in this book, but I had to mention this. There has been a lot of research lately into this cool, super poorly understood phenomenon of animal fluorescence. So fluorescence is a physical property of certain materials. You might know it from white t-shirts at like a blacklight party or your own fingernails and teeth at a blacklight party. Fluorescent materials, basically when UV light hits them, it kind of, it's reflected back. Let me think of how to explain this better. So UV light is slightly outside the visible range for humans. But a fluorescent material can kind of take in that UV light, siphon off some of the energy, and re-emit it as a color that we can see. So for the budgie, under this UV light, you can see that some of its feathers on its head and sort of under its chin are giving off a yellow fluorescent hue. And scientists really don't know why this happens. They keep discovering this property in lots of different animals. Most recently, it's been more deeply explored in mammals, and lots of mammals have been shown to fluoresce, including platypuses and spring hares. The budgie actually has helped us understand it better than other animals because people have done a lot of experiments on fluorescent budgies. One of my favorites is that they're trying to figure out whether this fluorescence is helpful for attraction and mating. So they put sunscreen on the budgie's fluorescent patches to see if that would make it less attractive to mates. It did, but maybe that's just because it was covered in sunscreen. It's hard to say. So moving along, the best original potentially song award goes to flute lyrebirds. There's a lot of Australian birds in this presentation because Australia is a really, really cool place and has a lot of really, really cool birds. One of them is the lyrebird. The technical name of the species that this bird belongs to is the superb lyrebird. Lyrebirds are well known for their mimicry. So around here, we have mockingbirds that can imitate the songs of other birds, and they're super cool to hear. Lyrebirds can do that as well, and they are potentially even better at it, and they also like to make their own kind of like remixes and mashups, and they'll pass them down through generations. They're really creative. singers and songwriters, you could say. And captive lyrebirds are known to also kind of mix in songs from and sounds from outside the natural world. So maybe they will imitate some construction equipment. Maybe they will imitate like a camera shutter or like a car alarm or another noise they might hear from inside their environment. So there's this sort of mysterious legend in Australia that goes back to the 1920s of the flute lyrebird. So the legend says that in and around that decade, a man who played the flute had a captive lyrebird in a cage. He would play the flute, the lyrebird would hear him, and then eventually he released this bird, and that bird, wandered around the forest singing and taught these flute songs to fellow birds and also to its offspring. And now they say that, if you're in this particular part of the forest in Australia, you can hear not just the normal lyrebird bird remix songs, but the flute lyrebird songs that incorporate this human music. For the book, we talked to a zoo musicologist, another incredible job I didn't know existed, named Hollis Taylor, who specifically has been kind of tracking down whether there's any merit to this legend. And she says it's a definite maybe. It's hard to say if these particular birds just, are very creative or maybe heard other bird sounds that sounded very fluty and kind of took off with that, or if at some point there was a human flautist involved. I think our next award also goes to an Australian bird. Yes, the Flamin' Hot Award. This is another one of my very favorite birds from the book. Again, not exactly a species, but a group of birds that are known as firehawks. So I think one thing I thought about a lot when putting this book together is sort of like what separates humans from other animals, if anything. I mean, I think, it's something you could talk about with people for hours and argue about. I think until recently, I would have said that humans are the only animals that can make fire, but it's not completely true. Firehawks are another animal that has managed to, if not create fire, harness it for their own needs. So what these birds will do, it's mostly birds of prey. So it's like falcons and kites will kind of go to an existing brush fire. They'll dive down and pick up a flaming twig or branch, and then they'll fly a little ways and drop it to extend the reach of the fire. Why do they do this? Because a fire for a bird of prey is sort of like a barbecue. The fire like blasts little insects up into the air. They can snap them out of the air. It like chases small mammals and smaller birds out of the brush so they can catch them. So the firehawks really love the fire and they want to spread it, and they figured out how to do it. And firefighters in Australia actually find these birds to be a bit of a pain because they'll be fighting the fire and trying to contain it, and then a bird will swoop over them with a flaming branch and start a whole new one. But the flip side of that is that, in our current climate, fires, especially in that part of the world, can be very dangerous and scary and bad for the environment. But traditionally, fire setting and fire management was a huge part of keeping like the ecology around there stable. It clears out dead wood, it helps things regenerate. And it's thought that indigenous people there, it's sort of hard to tell the provenance of some of these stories. But some people say that indigenous people in Australia who have been practicing fire management for many, many generations may have learned some of this from the hawks. So there's a little bit, again, of knowledge sharing there, potentially, which is pretty cool. So if we want to move on to the next, oh, okay. Our award ceremony has been taken over briefly by non-birds. I'm very sorry to do this. I know this is supposed to be a bird-specific event, but I just had to take a minute for some other types of critters, and I decided to highlight for your consideration the quote-unquote flying animals of Southeast Asia. This was another thing I really liked learning about for the book. Here in North America, we have one very famous non-flying flying animal, which is the flying squirrel. People know flying squirrels. They have these big, cool skin flaps between their front and back legs that allow them to glide between trees. In the forests of Southeast Asia, which have extremely tall and like straight up and down trees and a little bit less like branch crossover than some other forests, a lot of different animals have evolved similar methods of gliding. So here you've got On the left side, the Wallace's flying frog, which glides with the help of these really cool, like, toe parachutes that it kind of spreads out. Um, in the middle here, you've got Draco lizards, which, like a flying squirrel, have sort of a skin flap between their legs that does the same thing. And then on the bottom there, you've got the red giant flying squirrel, which is like our flying squirrels, but bigger. There are also flying snakes, which I find truly amazing. They don't have skin flaps, but they can kind of flatten out their bodies and they wiggle in the air and they can get from one tree to another that way. Some of these animals can travel hundreds of feet in a single glide. So if you ever get sick of birds, it's all not lost for you. You can move on to some of these very cool quote unquote flying creatures. Um, so our next award is going to go to the most adorably confused birds that we know of. And these are the pufflings of Jaime Island in Iceland. So this is kind of another interesting story of human culture and bird culture colliding. Puffins nest on cliffs in Iceland. And when the baby puffins are born, they're supposed to fly towards the moon and land in the water. But on Jaime, there's enough, human buildings and artificial light that during puffling hatching season, a puffling is a baby puffin, a lot of these babies get confused and they end up wandering into the town. And so this tradition has come up during puffling hatching season where people in the town, like families, children, stay up all night and they just gather pufflings that have gotten lost and they put them in little shoe boxes. There's a lot of knowledge about how to care for them. Sometimes if they don't seem to be doing well, they take them to the puffling rehab center. And then after they're big enough, they do what the pufflings were supposed to do in the first place. They take them to the cliffs and they throw them into the sea like a little fluffy baseball. So yeah, the most adorably confused award goes to baby puffins in Jaime. These are our final awards of the evening, the Best Duo Awards. We've got two winners because how could you not? Our first winner is the incredible dynamic duo of oxpeckers and rhinoceroses. I don't know if we can get to that slide. Oh, okay, here we go. This is really cool. So oxpeckers are these little tiny birds. You can see them on the left here. They've got these cool eye rings that make them look like they're always watching. And they really are. They're extremely wary. They're flocking birds, so they listen to each other. And they are also now helpful to larger animals that are maybe not necessarily less alert, but have different senses. So one example of that is they've kind of teamed up with rhinoceroses to keep each other safe. The researcher I spoke to was sort of like, oxpeckers are like the security system of the savannah for rhinoceroses. If they hear or see something suspicious, they will sound an alarm and the rhinoceros knows to leave. They also have sort of another way of working together, which is that the oxpeckers will pick parasites off of the rhinoceros. And the oxpecker gets a little food and the rhinoceros gets rid of a parasite. But their main way of interacting is through this like relationship of vigilance. The researcher I talked to actually said that the oxpeckers are so effective at helping rhinoceroses avoid humans that they basically couldn't find any rhinoceroses with oxpeckers to study because they would all run away. So they had to come up with different methods to do their research because the oxpeckers are such effective alarms for the rhinos. And then our final award winners for the evening, another one of my favorites from the book, honey guides and humans. So one of the things that I found really fascinating while writing this book was learning a little bit more about how humans relate to wildlife in our time. I think a lot of us who live in cities maybe consider ourselves to have like a bit of a separation from wildlife, even if we don't want to. Maybe we watch it, maybe we learn about it, but it's not necessarily like a two-way relationship and it's not necessarily a part of our everyday lives. Obviously that's not true for everybody. But I was really excited and fascinated to learn a little bit about examples sort of the opposite type of examples that sort of seem like they're from another time, but are still happening today. And one of them is this mutual relationship between honey guides and humans, which happens across Africa. So honey guides are these pretty cute little birds. I think they're related to cuckoos, and um they live across Africa, and they're pretty shy, but over many, 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 many years, they've developed a relationship with human hunter-gatherers in the area because, like the oxpeckers and the rhinos, each of these species has something the other doesn't, and they can help each other. So honey guides know how to find honey, and they like to eat beeswax, and humans know how to get at honey, and they like to eat honey, but they don't always know how to find it. So what will happen during like a honey guide human honey hunting trip? I talked to a honey hunter named Iswatini, or from Iswatini named Sylvester, who talked me through how he does this. He will go into the woods near where he lives with like a special whistle that he's made, and he'll blow the whistle. And if a honey guide is nearby and knows where some honey is, the honey guide will kind of fly past, making kind of a buzzing sound with its wings. And Sylvester will follow this honey guide from place to place. The honey guide never gets too close, but it also never gets too far. It always makes sure that Sylvester can see him flying through the trees. And the honey guide will eventually lead Sylvester to, like, a hollow tree or a log or a ground nest or somewhere where honeybees have made honey. Then the honey guide, steps back. Sylvester gets the bees away from the honey, either by chopping some of the hive out of the tree or by smoking the bees out. Sylvester is able to harvest the honey and then leaves some honeycomb for the honey guide. And then the next time it happens again. Um, Again, this was just something that I found pretty moving to learn about in this day and age. It's also an endangered relationship. Privatization of land in Africa is making it harder for Sylvester and other people to maintain this relationship. And also, people are just kind of losing touch with this aspect of their culture sometimes. So it was really special to get to learn about it and get to include it in this book. So those are all of our awardees tonight. Thank you all so much for watching and for dealing with the technical difficulties. I am looking forward to hearing your questions, and thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much, Kara. Thank you again, everybody, for bearing with us. But I think everyone will agree that that was well worth the wait. I mean, every slide was more amazing than the last. I do have some questions to kick us off. I know Tasha is monitoring the Q&A. But just to start, I wanted to, well, first of all, thank you for coming to speak with us. I am so curious about your research process to come up with all the stories in this book. So what did that kind of look like? It sounds like you talked to a ton of researchers, but there's so much content in this book. So yeah, what was that process like? Did you travel a lot? How did you come up with what you wanted to cover? And was it word of mouth of you just heard of these amazing things that led you from one to the other? But yeah, I'm just curious how that research process went.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the research for this book, overall, this book took, several years to write. I think I was working on it for about 3 years, 3 or 4 years before it came out. So a lot of time. But before that, I've been a wildlife journalist for a while, since almost 10 years actually. So over time, I've like collected stories, and I read a lot of papers, and I do talk to a lot of people. And so when Atlas Obscura approached me to write this book, I already had sort of like a list in my head of things that I would want to include. So I had that, and then I started just like looking everywhere, like asking everyone, trying to read everything I could. And then that's also where the contributors like really came in. All these people pitched ideas for the book, and some of it was stuff I had never heard of in my life. And so it was really cool to get to hear from people who had access to different environments and different knowledge, and to get to include them in the writing process.
Um, NYC Bird Alliance was, well, we always try to incorporate storytelling into our work, always thinking about how to keep things relatable and fun and interesting. And that's not very hard with birders, there's so much that to learn about birds here in New York City and around the world. What key elements did you and your co-writer, Joshua Foer, focus on when writing the book to keep it so vibrant and interesting?
Yeah, so that's something I definitely think about a lot. I mean, we talked about this book. The publisher would say that she wanted it to feel like she wanted reading it to feel like eating a bag of chips where like you can't really stop turning the pages because like each page is like so salty and crispy and good. And you're like, I just want to do one more. So we really were focused on making sure that everything was really snappy and interesting. But I don't know, I think it can be a challenge at times, but I also think we have so much in common with other living things, more than we maybe think. It's not so hard to make things relatable. Like in the end, we all want the same things. So kind of focusing on that, drawing some parallels can be kind of like funny, but also intriguing. I know people talk about how anthropomorphism is like inappropriate. But I think at times it's useful because again, it just reminds us that like we're all on the same planet, we're all subject to the same forces, and we all are trying to like eat and sleep and have companionship and have fun. Like those are things that are pretty common to many, many species. And then of course there are fascinating differences as well that can be really interesting and amusing in their own right. So just kind of embracing both those sides and leaning into some of these like funny things or absurd things, and that's how we approached it.
Yeah. I was pretty struck by how some of the very unique qualities of these birds from around the world, they're very similar or parallel to a lot of qualities that some of our birds in New York City have. There's a story that our director of conservation and science recently shared where one of the green roofs that we're monitoring, there's a mockingbird there. And so they're on this kind of green roof patio. They sort of have elevator music going on all the time, and they heard the mockingbird whistling the same tune that they constantly play on the screen roof. And so it was very interesting to hear very similar things with the flute lyrebird, like you were saying. Now that you have all these amazing facts and stories in your brain, has it changed how you're kind of walking around the world and engaging with nature just in your everyday life?
Honestly, yes. I think I've always really loved nature. That's why I got into this in the first place. I love learning about what's out there, and I do try to like think about it all the time. But just having all of these different creatures kind of like living in my mind and um sort of being available for comparison and thinking about like almost everything I see reminds me of something now. Like I'll be walking down the street and I'll see something and I'll think of something from the book or something that I wish I could put in a hypothetical sequel to the book because more research is coming out every day and I'm learning new things every day. It definitely has made me feel like the whole world is closer to me somehow. Um, Even though I haven't actually, you asked this before. I didn't really travel to research this book. I wrote a lot of it during lockdown, so that's part of why. But also, there's just so many different things. There wasn't really time. I had to make a lot of phone calls and find other ways to learn. But I feel like I feel closer to the world having put it together.
That's an excellent segue because as I mentioned at the beginning when we were having some technical difficulties, birders tend to be really big travelers, whether that's around the world, around the country, or even just exploring other boroughs here in New York City. So if birders wanted to have a truly unique experience, where would you recommend they travel, even if it's one of the places you already listed?
Totally. So, I have two like very different suggestions in terms of like how hard it is to get there and well, like how big of an endeavor it is. A close by place that is really worth visiting is Hawk Mountain in Pennsylvania. Um, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of it. It's this incredible mountaintop research station, basically, and it's situated on a flyway. So during fall and spring migrations, raptors kind of get like channeled over this one spot by different air currents, and they're just flying straight past you. And they've been doing daily bird counts there for a really, really long time. I don't have the dates on hand, but it's one of the longest running, I think, ecological sort of counts in the country. And so you can kind of be part of that, counting the birds. And also people just say it's a super unique experience having eagles and hawks just like fly right by your head, one after the other. And just thinking about the amazing journeys that they're taking. So that's really cool. Another suggestion is the Galapagos. We talked about the vampire finch, which I doubt I will ever get to see one of those in my life. Most people won't, but there are so many other amazing birds on those islands. I've gotten to go before, and I'm actually leading a couple of trips with Atlas Obscura to the Galapagos, one in June and one in December next year. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, definitely look that up. I think we'll be seeing and talking about not just birds, but definitely a lot of birds.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds amazing. We have one question here that says, have you made materials for kids based on these cool factoids? There are many organizations here focused on engaging children in nature, and it would be nice to have these if you and the illustrator created some.
That's such a good idea. I'll bring that up with Atlas Obscura. I know there is like a kids version of the first Atlas Obscura book, so it's not unprecedented. I have a book that is for kids. It's different. It's called Detector Dogs, Dynamite Dolphins, and More Animals with Super Sensory Powers. It's for middle school or like, fifth grade age group. It's also about cool animals. In this case, animals that have senses that people don't have that allow them to do jobs for people. So uh that is also, I can plug that. But yeah, I think I love talking to kids about nature. I think they're often really smart about it, and most kids really love learning about it and teach me a lot too. On tour for this book, there were usually like 3 or 4 kids in the audience, and they always had great questions. And they were also often like, "Why isn't X thing in the book?" I would be like, "You caught me. I wish it was."
I have a somewhat more serious question here too from another audience member. Has climate change affected bird habitat and migration patterns, if any? Population displacement or reduction? Are these things that you learned about, and are there any interesting stories that you can share?
Yeah, that's a great question. Climate change is definitely super present in this book. I didn't want to shy away from it, and you can't. Like a lot of the animals and plants in this book are extremely affected by it, and also like providing opportunities to learn about its effects and what the future might hold. I will say, like, I'm not an expert on this, but my sense is that birds are a little bit more insulated from some of the effects of how climate change changes habitats because they're so mobile. It's
Mm.
easy for them to move around. A lot of the animals and plants that I wrote about that seem, most impacted are not able to move, not able to change habitats quite so easily. If they are going to do that, it's going to happen on a generational time scale. Whereas birds are like a little bit more flexible in terms of sort of like following the climate that they prefer, or in some cases, migration is a big part of their lives. Anyway, they're always moving around. But that being said, I'm trying to think of specific examples of birds in the book that are climate impacted, and it's difficult for me to right now, but I'm sure that they are.
Great. NYC Bird Alliance was able to join you at the book launch event with South Street Seaport Museum. Um, since then, have you had any unexpected and interesting responses from the public to this amazing book while on your book tour?
Yeah, it's been so much fun to meet people in different parts of the country and learn a little bit about how they experience and think about wildlife. A lot of people have told me about like cool encounters they've had. Like a lot of the events that I've done have been in cities. But people will tell me about, their urban wildlife. Like in San Francisco, there's this big controversy over black crowned night herons, which nest in huge groups in like parking lots and other places that people want to use for other things. I didn't know that where I live, black crowned night herons are sort of hard to find, or, if they're nesting in groups, it's not really where people are. So that was really cool. And yeah, just like getting a sense of people's day-to-day wildlife experiences around the country has been really cool. Also, people have come up with really great ways to describe the book. And I think my favorite was someone said it's like a yearbook for other species.
Awesome. I do just want to mention, not everybody knows, but we do a lot of harbor heron surveys. NYC Bird
Oh,
Alliance
cool.
does. We have these amazing harbor islands in New York Harbor, and it's the largest group of colonial nesting birds in all of the Northeast. It's right here in Manhattan's Harbor, and you can actually learn more about that. I'm gonna put a link in the chat if anyone's curious, but that's just something really interesting that not a lot of people know that we have right here in New York. Um, I think that's the last of our questions. I did just want to wrap up and ask what's next for you? What's next for Atlas Obscura? Where can we find you? Yeah, what's next for Cara?
Thank you so much, and thanks again, everybody, for coming. Atlas Obscura is constantly publishing cool news stories and coming up with amazing trips. I mentioned the Galapagos trip. There are a lot of really cool trips to places that you would have never thought to go, that are probably worth going on. I've been on an Atlas Obscura trip, and it's an amazing experience. For me, I'm a freelancer, so I'm all over the place. You can find my work in a lot of different magazines and newspapers. I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky now as well, if you want to follow me. And now that the book is wrapped up, I will hopefully be writing more and learning even more about creatures and sharing it with as many people as I can.
Thank you so much, Cara, for speaking with us tonight. This has been a highlight of my winter. It was so lovely meeting you. If you want to read more about this book, if or if you want to learn more about this book, Tasha is throwing a link in the chat. So please check out this amazing publication. It makes for a great gift also with the holiday season. I also just want to mention that today is Giving Tuesday. I'm sure everybody knows, but this year, our year-end giving campaign is supporting our engagement programs, which include our free bird outings, but also events like tonight's lecture. So please consider giving if you are able. Truly, any amount is greatly appreciated by our staff and our community of birders. It'll go to support your local community and also your local birds. To everyone watching, please make sure to check out our calendar page on our website. You can find that at nycbirdalliance.org/calendar and join us for future public programming. We have scheduled bird outings all year round across all 5 boroughs, the majority of which are free. We have bilingual birding, accessible birding, beginner birding, kind of something for everyone. And you can read more about each of our lectures for this series scheduled through March on our website as well. And with that, thank you again, Cara, and thank you all for joining us tonight, and have a great night.
Bye, everybody.